If you're not plugged into gaming news, which I suspect is most of my audience, these last couple of weeks have been wild because Xbox, which is owned by Microsoft, for those who don't know, they are currently imploding because they announced a 50% price hike for their monthly game subscription service, Game Pass Ultimate. Now, every streaming service has raised prices at this point, but usually it's by $1 or $2, which is still bad, but it's incremental. Game Pass Ultimate, however, went from being $20 a month to $30 a month, which is sad because it used to actually be a really great deal. In fact, it was once cheaper than Netflix, and you were able to download and play as many games as you wanted to from their catalog, and it was really cool. So it was a consumer-friendly option for gamers who couldn't afford to cough up $60 to $70 for new release games. But now it is one of the least consumer-friendly options that may very well lead to the death of Xbox altogether, because so many gamers were canceling their subscriptions after the announcement of this price hike that their website presumably became overloaded because of all of the cancellations. And this cost increase is directly correlated with Microsoft's acquisition of Activision-Blizzard, even though they explicitly told the judge overseeing the merger that Game Pass prices wouldn't increase if the merger was approved. Yet, here we are. And there was one person who was warning all of us against this sort of a thing and tried to actually stop it. I'm talking about former FTC Chair Lina Khan, and back in 2021, here's what she said in general about the effects of corporate consolidation on consumers and workers.
Significant market consolidation deprives consumers, workers, and independent businesses of choice, further enabling dominant firms to engage in unfair practices. As the wave of privacy abuses in recent years has shown, market dominance often allows companies to renege on commitments, evade the law, and repeatedly violate commission orders.
Now, she was talking more broadly about mergers and acquisitions right there, but that, of course, applies to Microsoft as well, as time has proven. But I've got to say, Lina Khan is by far and away the best thing to come out of the Biden administration, hands down, because she actually tried to enforce antitrust laws for once that stop these corporations from gobbling up other corporations, because that sort of thing is extremely harmful to everybody but the corporations. I mean, just think about why that is. If you're unhappy with your internet service provider, for example, and they just raised prices by $5 a month, and you don't like that, well, I mean, odds are you can't do nothing about it because internet service providers have a monopoly in the areas that they service. So if Comcast, say, raises the cost by like $5 a month, you kind of just have to suck it up and pay it, because if you don't, then you don't get internet. There's nobody else that you can go to. So this is happening in virtually every sector. Amazon is gobbling up companies. Most news organizations are now concentrated into the hands of just a couple of billionaires. And when it comes to Microsoft, before they acquired Activision-Blizzard, which itself used to be two separate entities, they bought ZeniMax and Bethesda and Ninja Theory and Mojang Studios, which owns Minecraft and Twisted Pixel and so many other game companies. And it's amounted to what Ethan Gatch of Kotaku called the total enshittification of Game Pass. And he's right. And in response to the colossal price hike of Game Pass, Lina Khan explained on Twitter, Microsoft's acquisition of Activision has been followed by significant price hikes and layoffs, harming both gamers and developers. As we've seen across sectors, increasing market consolidation and increasing prices often go hand in hand. As dominant firms become too big to care, they can make things worse for their customers without having to worry about the consequences. And that's exactly what happened in this instance. But cost isn't the only issue here, because Xbox as a company has gotten demonstrably shittier following their buyout of Activision-Blizzard. As Andy Chalk of PC Gamer reports, the deal was closed in October of 2023, even though the FTC's legal action against it was still pending, and it's been one shitty thing after another since then. Just a few months after the deal was sealed, Microsoft laid off 1,900 workers at Activision-Blizzard and Xbox, and they canceled the studio's long-awaited survival game. Then, in September of 2024, another 650 people were shown the door. That was followed by the layoff of 9,000 more employees across Microsoft in July of 2025, a spot of unpleasantness that also saw multiple game cancellations, the closure of the initiative, and knock-on impacts on other studios, even as Xbox boss Phil Spencer said the company's gaming business never looked stronger. So both consumers and developers were harmed in the immediate aftermath of this acquisition. And I'm not saying that all of these negative things wouldn't have happened had it not gone through, but the effect was obviously exacerbated by this acquisition. And guess what? This was something that was predicted by, you guessed it, Lina Khan. Here's what she said about the acquisition in an October 3rd interview.
I mean, we talked about the impact on game developers as well, right? One of the arguments in the case that we made was that Activision had been a platform neutral company. And as a result, game developers also had more pathways to kind of get to market. And one thing we argued was that if you allowed this merger to go through, it would basically allow Microsoft to become more of a walled garden. We may see more layoffs. We may see more price hikes. We may see kind of more degradation of certain games. And that just generally the way that competition encourages companies to kind of, just be fighting it out in the marketplace, that all of those factors would just make it so that Microsoft didn't have to try as hard. Even before the final appeals court had issued their opinion, Microsoft actually started announcing some of the layoffs, and the FTC was like sending letters to the court saying, they told you that they weren't going to do this, but guess what? They're already doing it.
So this is why her phrase "too big to care" is so accurate. But I'll admit, even I wasn't overly pessimistic about this acquisition because Activision-Blizzard was already one of the worst companies in the gaming space, whose CEO, Bobby Kotick, exploited employees and covered up alleged sexual abuse. And compared to Microsoft, whose reputation was better at the time due to the quality of Game Pass and in part because they were seen as the underdog when compared to Sony and Nintendo, it didn't seem like the worst thing in the world, and to a lot of gamers, it was ostensibly a good thing if they were able to acquire Activision-Blizzard. But it's important to remember that the cost of these acquisitions, they're very high, obviously. And in order to offset that cost, these companies are going to make cuts in other places to make sure they get back to as high profits as they possibly can have. And the problem is that workers are almost always the first on the chopping block after these companies make big purchases. And one of the other reasons why Xbox was able to avoid public scrutiny was because gamers were mostly focused on the anti-competitive element of this acquisition. And the fear was that they would make Call of Duty, which is owned by Activision-Blizzard, an Xbox exclusive and cut off PlayStation to the franchise. So that turned out to be false. In fact, Xbox has ported many exclusives over to PlayStation, like their new Indiana Jones games and even Gears of War. But that doesn't mean that all of the typical downsides that we always see with these mega mergers didn't materialize, because they in fact did. And this is always the case. And this is the lesson from this particular news story. Now, prior to the merger, both Microsoft and Activision-Blizzard were arguing that this would actually be great for consumers because it opened up their catalog of games to Game Pass customers, which is awesome, right? Because we all loved Game Pass at the time. But Lina Khan also sniffed out that bullshit too when she was FTC chair.
One question that came up as we were pursuing the lawsuit to try to prevent the Microsoft Activision merger was this question of whether an independent Activision would have made its content available through subscription or cloud gaming services itself. And the trial suggested, yes, that they would have. And under oath, executives admitted that, yes, if they could make the commercial terms work, they would. And so you can imagine a situation in which if Microsoft had actually been more constrained in the market by other players by other firms that also had, big gaming libraries, would they have been able to do this? It will be interesting to see if they have to backtrack here. But the series of price hikes that they've done suggest they feel pretty emboldened.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from a gaming perspective, there really is no competitor in the cloud space. And at the time of your lawsuit, I think the court ruled that it was such a nascent industry that they didn't think it was a big enough deal. But as it becomes more and more important, it's very clear that there is nobody challenging them. And so they can raise prices at will. So yeah, that is what gamers are noticing.
So basically every single thing that Lina Khan predicted came to fruition, not because she has a crystal ball, but because this is a predictable pattern of behavior for corporations motivated exclusively by capital. They don't care about consumers at all. There's no such thing as an altruistic business. Xbox was never planning to keep Game Pass costs low, especially after they acquired so many fucking companies. They weren't just gonna eat the cost because they're a great company who cares about gamers. They were gonna pass that cost on to you. It was inevitable, and they're trying to make that money back by milking you for everything that you've got. At least that's what they're going to try to do, assuming they don't go under because so many people are now canceling their service. And it's just really unfortunate that we no longer have a regulator like Lina Khan in a position of power to rein in these corporate giants, because that would be helpful at a time when there are so many acquisitions and mergers taking place. But one thing that I do appreciate because of this story is that gamers are now starting to realize how important the work that she was doing at the FTC was. And she says that they're sending her flowers now as a result, metaphorically speaking. But listen to what she says.
I fully remember the general consensus of the gaming community around the time of this lawsuit was that the FTC's lawsuit was frivolous and that Activision-Blizzard's a failing company. Microsoft will prop them up and save them and bring back all the great games we love and help the employees do good things. And that was the general idea. And people thought, oh, I'd love to get Call of Duty for a cheap price on Game Pass. And I remember all of the comments being mostly positive for this. And now, as the layoffs continue, the new games haven't been what were promised and the prices go up, people do understand what you were saying. And so I hope we can help hammer that home for future situations like this. People can remember they got burned before. This is a relevant example. Yeah, that
totally.
Yeah,
honestly, sometimes the way I learn that Microsoft is doing another price hike or layoffs is that gamers start posting apologies to me on Twitter. And that's how I learn. I'm like, oh, I guess Microsoft must have raised the price again.
And she's not lying. If you look at the replies to her tweet about Microsoft, the largest one is a meme of people lining up to apologize to her, and others vocalize the same sentiment. Sorry, Lina, you were right. Game Pass in Brazil increased by 100%. Sorry, Lina, we were blind. Fuck Activision and Xbox. You were a hero. I just couldn't see it back then. I apologize. Lina Khan was right about everything. Sorry times 1,000. Forgive us for not believing in you. Hey, so funny thing. Forgive me. You were always right, but nobody wanted to listen. And that's just a few examples, but some gamers who couldn't fight through the cognitive dissonance were actually attacking her because she was FTC chair and they claimed that she didn't do enough to fight Microsoft. I mean, Trump fired her back in February. She no longer has a job there and she did everything that she could. So the fact that you would blame her for this is absurd. But at least the honest people are understanding that she was right about everything and nobody wanted to listen. She was actually trying to stop gaming from getting even shittier, which is important because the trajectory of this industry has been bleak for quite some time. And anybody who's been following news of this industry knows that. And I would highly encourage you to watch that full interview with Atriarch that she did, because she also talks about antitrust in general. It's very informative, and she even touches on the Jared Kushner Saudi Arabia acquisition of EA, which is another gaming company that once gobbled up a bunch of other companies. So it's a complete mess, but keep in mind that corporate consolidation is just one of many reasons why prices are on the rise in gaming. Xbox also raised the cost of consoles twice this year, and their flagship system, which is the Xbox Series X, is now $650 when it was $500 back in 2020 when it launched. And I, for one, am old enough to remember console prices going down over the course of their lifespan, but these days they're going up. But Microsoft is by no means the only offender here, because PlayStation also announced the price hike thanks to Donald Trump's tariffs, which gamers were also warned about, by the way, and companies are still finding other ways to nickel and dime consumers. EA, for example, just released their free-to-play Skate game in early access, and if you want to play as a cardboard version of the protagonist from Dead Space, you have to pony up $35 for this cosmetic change. And as this Twitter account points out, it's $40 if you want the entire Dead Space bundle with the skateboard and stickers and whatnot. And let's not forget about Nintendo raising the cost of games like Mario Kart World to $80. And if you want to experience all of what Donkey Kong Bonanza has to offer, which is a phenomenal game, you've got to pay $90 in total. $70 for the base game and another $20 for the optional DLC that they could have easily released with the game, but they didn't do that because now they're making more money off of you after already getting $70 from you. It's just a complete mess, but this is capitalism. It saps all life and joy out of everything in order to maximize profits. It's why we see so many sequels and remakes, because reselling us successful franchises that they already sold to us a million times is less risky than giving us new franchises that gamers might not be receptive to. Capitalism incentivizes these companies to feed us the safest, most sanitized, formulaic slop in order to appease shareholders because they're too afraid to take any risks. And on that note, we just learned this from journalist Steven Totillo. Last year, Ubisoft canceled an Assassin's Creed game set during Reconstruction, was to feature a black assassin who, among other things, fought the clan's rise. Sources say leadership nixed it, concerned with U.S. political climate and Yasuke backlash. Yasuke, for those that don't know, is a black character featured in the last Assassin's Creed that gamers threw temper tantrums about. So, so much for DEI killing art, right? Turns out racism is what's really killing art. But me saying that is blasphemy to gamers because a lot of them are reactionary and anti-representation and pro-Trump, and they don't understand how their political philosophy is killing the hobby that we all enjoy so much. But with regard to Assassin's Creed, it's actually really sad that they canceled that project because I actually would have been interested in that. I used to enjoy Assassin's Creed games, but just kind of lost interest over time because they all started to feel like soulless cash grabs after a while. But I mean, that's what happens. They, introduce something that's successful and then they milk it and beat it into the ground and then nobody cares anymore because, them milking franchises is just the safest bet. But, we're not going to get that now. We're not going to experience that because leadership is too afraid to take a risk. And it's because, that might hurt profitability. They think that offending racists hurts profitability potentially, which is a sad state of affairs. But I mean, it speaks to how art and creativity are stifled under capitalism. But reactionary gamers, they're never going to acknowledge that, which is so frustrating to me. I wish that they would acknowledge how their own ideology is undermining the thing that they love so much, the thing that we all love so much. They're probably going to keep blaming industry woes on representation and DEI instead of the main culprit, which is capitalism. But until they wake the fuck up, things are only going to continue to get worse and the industry will keep being the dumpster fire that it is.